Hello and welcome back. I am still Kelly Quinn and I'm going to still moderate for our last session. We're in the home stretch. I'm sure there are a lot of sporting metaphors that I can adopt. We're batting cleanup. We're in the home stretch. It's the final countdown, I think. Thank you for laughing. Abram Fox, I appreciate that. I've actually been hoping, Abram, that you would ask a question so I could say, what does the fox say? It's still I just want it there. Okay. Thank you for laughing, Mary Savig. Thank you for being and thinking with us today. We are really eager to know what you have thought of the program, of the speakers, of how the pace of the session has gone. This is our first time hosting a symposium about American, I think, in fact, it's not just our first time, it's the first time in the world on American art, history, and digital scholarship. We'd love for you to fill out a yellow evaluation form and leave it at the desk upstairs, please. It should be in the packet that you received. If you don't have time today, you're welcome to send it back to our offices, or you could fax it, you could also email it. We really look forward to your comments and to thinking with you. I understand that there's also interest in having a shared contact list of all those who attended. And that sounds like a great idea. And when I set up the Eventbrite invitation, I did not ask people if it would be okay to share your information with others. So I'm going to figure about that and not reveal people's personal information. We take that very seriously at the Smithsonian. And I'll figure it out, and then I'll try and do some matchmaking. But we'll try to figure out a way to have people opt in. And again, I want to emphasize it's intellectual matchmaking. Maya Fu prepared a detailed handout of the spec list for the app and the website of the Story of the Beautiful. If you are watching on Ustream or after the fact, or if you're following the Twitter stream, if you want to let us at Archives of American Art know that you're interested in a copy of that, we can send you a copy of their spec list, which was really quite helpful. And I think there were, again, a couple of exclamation points on Twitter as we circulated that. So thanks for that. We are looking forward to your evaluation. We're looking forward to following your tweets. We're also looking forward to wine and cheese in the 4:30-ish time frame. But first we have to figure out, what does scholarship look like as we take a digital turn in art history? And I knew as we were pulling this together that if we were going to think about how do we do rigorous, peer-reviewed scholarship in American visual culture, one of the people we needed to have come and speak with us is Joan Saab. So Joan Saab is with us today to talk about her book, and I'm putting that in quotes, and again, the detailed information about her past projects and future projects is in your speaker's bio, as is Teresa O'Malley's biography and Emily Pugh's. Emily and Teresa are colleagues from down the street who in many ways I think are leading the way to think about what digital scholarship looks like, both in the publication 19th Century Art Worldwide, which I hope you all are reading, not just for the content but also the presentation, and then also thinking about what are the kinds of possibilities if you have committed your life to landscape history. How do you imagine pivoting through different kinds of scholarly modes of productivity and scholarly modes of production? So what is scholarship in the moment of digital art history? It's just like old scholarship. It does take some new presentation forms, though. So we'll hear from Joan and Teresa and Emily about how they have grappled with these questions.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to thank everybody for sticking around for the last panel. And I want to thank Kelly and all the people at the archives and at the Smithsonian for including me with this amazing assortment of scholars. Like so many people who've been up here today, I'm a bit of an accidental digital practitioner. Trained in American studies and working in teaching in visual and cultural studies, my scholarship can be difficult to categorize for others, and myself included. My most recent book, and I too put it in quotation marks, is a multimedia born digital project written on the publishing platform Scalar about the history and legacy of Mexican artist David Alfaro Siqueiros' mural America Tropical, which was painted in 1932 in the then newly restored Olvera Street in downtown Los Angeles, and very quickly whitewashed because of its incendiary subject matter. You can see the partial whitewash. The area that you could see from the street was almost immediately whitewashed, and then the whole thing was covered over. Over the past 80 years, the central image, despite being covered up, went viral, as it were, and began appearing in murals across California and the Southwest, reaching as far as Chicago. Although, unlike viruses which pass invisibly and unexpectedly from host to host, the iterations of this image throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s were site-specific and fixed in concrete. And here I have a huge archive of these visual citations, and I'm not going to show you. This is one I took illegally with my cell phone. I'm not going to show you all of them. I'm just going to point to a couple of them. I'm not actually going to spend too much time on the content of this project today, since it's currently somewhere in the review process, so hopefully you'll have access to it very, very shortly, and hopefully for free. What I want to talk about instead is how and why I decided to write the project in a born digital format. But as you'll see as I talk about it today, in this case, form and content are closely intertwined and in some ways indistinguishable. But first, a little bit of background. In the summer of 2008, I was invited to participate in a 3-day program at the Scholarly Communications Institute at the University of Virginia, or SCI, on the topic of visual studies. Now, I had no idea what the SCI was, but since I was the director of our visual culture program, and it was a visual culture event, I thought I should go. And this is a theme that's going to reemerge in my talk today, but also in the project. In the project, I call it the scholarly shoulds. This sort of feeling like, well, I don't really want to, but I don't know what this is, but I really should. So I went. I could spend all day just talking about SCI. It was a very weird assortment of librarians, gamers, and scholars, and we were tasked with, quote unquote, transforming the field. But it was very clear that we had no field, or that the field meant very different things to everybody in the room. And it became very clear to the people at SCI that in the case of visual studies, the field was sort of amorphous, to say the least. But what happened there, and the other thing I didn't realize was that SCI was pretty much an audition for the Mellon Foundation. At SCI, I met 4 other scholars, Tara McPherson, Brian Goldfarb, Nick Mirzoff, and Wendy Chun. And together, we first received a planning grant and then an implementation grant from the Mellon Foundation to start something called the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture. And you can go to the website. Oh, shoot, I didn't put the website up, but I will get it to you. If you just Google the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, it will come up. One of the things we did, first with the planning grant and then with the implementation grant, was convened a group of scholars, many of them good friends of ours, I must admit, to talk about what sorts of things did we need to do to transform the field, whatever that field would be. Because it became very clear to those of us involved in the grant that what we didn't need was another sort of set of tools or some sort of technological, innovations to be given to us that was going to somehow or another transform, again that word, our scholarship. That it had to be organic and it had to come from the scholars. And out of that came Scalar. There's Scalar. And if you go to if you just put in Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, I'm sorry, when I did my screenshots, I cut off the address. But if you just go to that, you can go to Scalar, you can do a little video tutorial, you can download it, you can play with it. But basically, what Scalar is, as you can see here, is a free open source authoring and publishing platform that's designed to make it easy for authors to write long-form born digital scholarship online. I'm not going to read too much about it because I'm going to actually demo my project for you at the end of my talk today. I should also say that early on, as part of this grant, we partnered with 3 different university presses, MIT, Duke, and the University of California Press, because it's all well and good to create this authoring platform for scholars in the field, but if there's no place to put that scholarship, then it really doesn't mean anything, particularly in the academic framework that we all operate in, or those of us on the grant all operated in which you need this sort of credentialing in order to sort of move up the scholarly food chain. So I had no plans originally to write anything in Scalar. I was interested in the larger Alliance project because I was keenly aware of the growing crisis in scholarly publishing, and I was worried about my grad students and the future of art history, visual studies, and humanities research in general. I was working on a traditional book that explored networks of craft and fine art in the New York and Mexican art worlds in the 1930s and 40s. And as I said earlier, I'm not even remotely a techie. I could hardly even figure out how to get from my PowerPoint to my website. And I'm still not sure it's going to happen. So, but as part of the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, we convened a 4-week NEH Summer Institute at USC, which was where the head PI, Tara McPherson, lives and works. And it's also the home, most importantly, of all of the technologists. Like everybody who's been up here today, I can't say how important collaboration with a team of people who could actually not just do what I said, oh, I might want to do this, but said, have you thought about doing this? Because it really, so much digital humanities work has to be a collaboration between the technologists and the sort of content producers. Because if the technologists aren't invested, it's not really a collaboration. Then you're just sort of, hiring them to do something. So this sort of true collaboration, as I'm going off script here, it requires a set of, of trusting partnerships. But so we were out in LA for the summer, and I needed a project. So I decided to do something on the efforts taking place to restore Siqueiros' mural. And out of that, the project grew, and then it grew, and it continues to grow. As I said earlier, in 1932, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the project because, as I said earlier, it is really this marriage of form and content which made me realize that perhaps Scalar was a good platform on which to present this project. Okay, so as I said earlier, in 1932, the Mexican muralist David Alfaro Siqueiros spent 6 months in Los Angeles after being exiled from Mexico for subversive activities. A committed communist and modernist, he repeatedly looked for ways to combine his art practice and his politics in new and dynamic ways. While in Los Angeles, he painted 3 murals: Workers' Meeting at the Chouinard School of Art, Portrait of Mexico Today for private residents, oops, what happened to, and America Tropical. I guess my slides are out of order there. While in Los Angeles, Siqueiros also experimented with his technique to find ways that would allow him to move away from traditional fresco processes of lime on plaster to less labor-intensive methods that would enable him to paint quickly and in a variety of spaces. He incorporated film and photographic techniques, as inspired by his friendship with Sergei Eisenstein, and you can see Eisenstein's the guy in the beret there, and played with industrial tools and materials such as poured concrete, air guns, and compressors. He detailed all of these goals in manifesto-like language and multiple treaties, in particular the vehicles of dialectic subversive painting, and attempted to implement them with his collective or block of mural painters. Because of the incendiary subject matter of America Tropical, though, as you can see here, it's a peasant on a double cross with an eagle that represents both the American eagle as well as the Mexican eagle above. The work was immediately whitewashed, almost immediately. Efforts to repair America Tropical began in 1968 when the young Chicano activist Jesus Trevino teamed with art historian Schifra Goldman and brought 2 mural experts from Mexico City to work on the wall. Due in large part to Siqueiros' non-traditional mural painting methods, however, they were unable to restore the piece. Trevino, who is a budding filmmaker, made a documentary about their efforts, and he made the documentary. There was no existing material on the mural other than 2 black and white photographs, and he filmed the photographs using whiteout and masking tape. So it's, again, this sort of interesting notion of sort of filmic murals and whiteout and sort of low-tech sort of ingenuity combined with what at the time was the new media of the day. So Trevino made this documentary. It was broadcast on public television, and Siqueiros in his work was introduced to an expanded community of local artists and activists who embraced him as a cultural hero and began to paint on their own walls. And I showed you just a bit of, this is Barbara Carrasco, and she has a segment in her LA history about the whitewashing. This is a painting called Homage de Siqueiros by Eva Cockroft, and this is over self-help graphics in East LA. Oops. And there's tons of them. And I have a really large video archive of these murals that I've incorporated into the project. Anyway, so it wasn't until 1988 that the Getty Conservation Institute teamed with the city of Los Angeles to restore the piece as part of the cultural patrimony of the city. Nevertheless, it took almost 25 more years before the America Tropical Visitor Center, with the conserved mural, not the restored mural, but the conserved mural as its centerpiece, opened in October 2012. And here you can see these are some restoration images, and here's a sort of bad image of the Visitor's Interpretation Center. Okay. In the summer of 2010, as part of my work on the Alliance for Networking Visual Culture, I traveled with my husband and 2 children to Los Angeles to participate in that NEH Summer Institute at USC entitled Broadening the Digital Humanities. I'd spent the past year working on a book-length project that now included a section about Siqueiros in Los Angeles, so I was particularly pleased that the seminar overlapped with what the Los Angeles Mexican Cultural Heritage Center was calling the Summer of Siqueiros. And he was everywhere. There was an opera, there was a show at the Autry, you could get your own T-shirt, there were other shows in smaller galleries. There really was a sort of Siqueiros mania. And as I moved from the various archives and followed the image's multi-sided trajectory from the barrios of East Los Angeles to the reading rooms of the Getty, I began to realize that its story dovetailed very nicely with the affordances of the scalar platform that I was working on in my workshop at USC, to write multi-layered, multimedia scholarly projects. Moreover, as I continued to work on the project, I began to find pieces of it everywhere, from both institutional and vernacular sources. There's a sort of blog explosion of of people writing and weighing in on the history and conservation of America Tropical. There's lectures. There are multiple Facebook pages devoted to Siqueiros. There's the Amigos de Siqueiros. There's LA Siqueiros. There's Siqueiros LA. There's a lot of them. So these non-traditional sources, and some of them were completely unreliable, and then some of them were great, raised unexpected questions for me about issues of patrimony and ownership, not only of the mural, but of the story itself. I still had no intention, however, of writing a digital book. But because the story of America Tropical spans so many registers and so many time periods, the 1930s, the 1960s, the 1980s, and today, I was having a devil of a time writing it. I had this huge visual archive of all of these murals. Many of them I had started to videotape because it's really difficult to document murals, because anybody who's tried to sort of put together an image bank of a monumental or big mural knows that you either have to stand back really, really far, and a lot of these murals are on like highway ramps, so you can't really do that. Or else you have to get up really, really close and take lots of different pictures and piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. So I started filming them. In part, this was, it was kind of fortuitous, because one of the things that Siqueiros repeatedly said was that he was really inspired by Eisenstein and he wanted to paint a filmic mural. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll film my murals. But it also, and this is something that I'm going to get to in a moment and a couple of other people have brought up, it also helped me to address some of the thorny issues of permissions and cultural ownership. Because they were little educational films, I could put them into Critical Commons with my own commentary. And it also allowed me to do this sort of close-up, pan-out, zoom in, and get a sense of the whole work of art. Okay. But as I said, I still was sort of reluctant to write about, to do this as a born digital book. I thought, oh, what am I going to do? I want a book. I want something you can hold in your hands. I had all these, all of the questions that, I've given papers on this topic many times, and people ask me about all the time. Believe me, I was grappling with them. I was, wrecked with scholarly anxiety. But I realized that Scalar actually is a dynamic authoring platform, and it allows for rich, multi-layered, and multi-sited history. We'll go to that in a second. Using the platform allowed me to organize the project in a much more inclusive and horizontal way than any sort of linear book format would allow me to do. And this was one of the things that I would have, is that there were so many different sort of pieces to the project that as I tried to put it into a sort of traditional chronological narrative, I'd say about, okay, what about this? Oh, we've got to talk about Eisenstein. Oh, we've got to talk about Eisenstein's friendship with Rivera. Oh, then we've got to talk about Rivera's falling out with Siqueiros. And so it was extremely distracting to an overall narrative. So rather than try to force it into one, I sort of blew it up. Also, it happened that writing in Scalar enabled me to address many of the key issues of my argument regarding issues of patrimony, the construction of narrative, and the relationship between form and content, in both the project's form and its content. Because, as I said, Siqueiros was keenly interested in the possibilities of new media, and in his case, new media consisted of air compressors and poured concrete, as a way of transforming mural painting. It made sense to me to play with a new sort of media form myself, to write a sort of visual argument. So let me show you the project. The project's actually really huge. It consists of over 100 individual pages, and some of these Scalar pages are like 10 single-spaced pages of Microsoft Word. So I think if I were to print this thing out, I would have, a stack of paper up to the top of the podium. And I don't anticipate that anyone's going to actually, well, I don't know, actually a couple of people have, but are going to read the project straight through, because one of the ways that it's set up is that Scalar works in linked media. So there are pages, media, and paths. And you can arrange the paths so that they share pages. And you can move, you can sort of hopscotch around. It also, however, allows you to read it in a fairly traditional way. If you were so inclined, you could start with the introduction path. I've arranged it into 5 separate paths. There's an introduction path, which is just that, a biography path that gives a sort of history of Siqueiros and his media, a legacies path, which is this sort of huge sort of tentacles stretching out. Searching for Siqueiros is more of a sort of bloggy, this is me moving through my archives kind of path. And then the writing history in the digital age is where I've dumped all of the scholarly shoulds. That's where the citations are, the historiography's there, the methodology's there. It's all of the stuff, the sort of backbone of the project. And there's a way that you can move through these shared pages and read it, as I said, very chronologically. You can go introduction to biography, legacies, and you can skip the searching if you want to, or the writing, or you can go back and forth as you like. But you can also read it in much more circular ways. You can read it through tags. So these are just some of the tags, and I'll show you the live tags in a minute. But and as you click on the tags, it gives you all of these different relationships. And the tags are actually, for me as an author, they performed a really valuable function because they allowed me to see relationships between pages and places and individuals that I may never have actually thought of. Because every time I wrote something, it gives you a little line in the just like WordPress, where you can tag it. And so doing these sort of semantic things where all of a sudden the tags are morphing and moving, and as I said, I'll show you in a second the live bit of it, but it allowed me to say, like, oh my gosh, there's a really interesting relationship here between Picasso and it's now got me to Santa Barbara, places that wouldn't normally be linked. You can also read it through media. Here you can see paths, pages, media, tags, and get a sense of how all of the different pieces intersect. And then again, in a much more sort of relational sort of set of visualization tools, so you can see where and how the different pages link. Again, here's another one. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. And while some of this is just kind of cool and fun to play with, it does provide an alternative way of moving through the narrative. I mean, in some ways, the book has this. Come back. It has this sort of build your own adventure sort of feeling, like you can, oh, I think I'll go down this path. And it's set up, it should be fairly user-friendly. So let's say you're moving down the biography path and you say, oh, I'm kind of interested in this, and you keep going and you keep going. But then you say, oh, I don't want to be there anymore. You can go back to the table of contents very easily. Within it, there are lots of, here, we'll do this one. There's also all of these what I call subpaths and sort of cul-de-sacs. And I think of these as like little like narrative trapdoors you can fall into. So let's say you're reading about Tashko and you want to know about William Spratling, who is a jewelry designer who sort of put it on the map as a tourist destination for expats in the 20s and 30s. You can follow that path. If you want to know more about Eisenstein, oh, you can follow that path. And all of a sudden, you're in another path. And here, you know, this is Eisenstein's Imagine Mexico, and this one also has a subpath, or what I call a little cul-de-sac, because you'll see it winds right back around to the first page, Tashko 1931. So you can go look at something about Eisenstein also in making Que Viva Mexico, which is the film he was working on when he met Siqueiros in Los Angeles, was very, not in Los Angeles, in Mexico, was very interested in making a mural-like film. So there is this back and forth, this sort of trans-media sort of reference taking place already. So at any time in the narrative, you can just go back to the table of contents or the sitemap and reorient yourself. Now, I'm getting the little red dot that says I'm out of time, so I just want to conclude. Because I could stand up here all day and talk, like play with the little thing, and I could talk about all the anxieties that it raised for me. But I just want to conclude by saying that I called the work Searching for Siqueiros. And I called it that because in the most literal sense, that's what it is. It's simultaneously a historical excavation, looking for traces of the original work under the whitewash, as well as a more contemporary intellectual scavenger hunt, a citing, or even a citation citing of visual references. But searching also implies a quest, and my quest has been both archival and methodological. In searching, I've been mapping visual cues and references, but also looking for a scholarly practice, a dynamic form of writing and sorting and saving, a new methodology for visual culture in the digital age. Thank you.